All right, joining me now, Scott Martin of Kingsview Asset Management, a Fox News contributor, and Cato Institute Senior Fellow Dan Mitchell is here as well. Scott, what do you think about all this?
It's great news. I mean, Melissa, I would say this is something that's been weighing on the market the last few weeks, really, with regards to the trading of the S&P. So to have this confirmation that they're going to get them both done together is great. And don't forget, the market is a forward-looking indicator. Even though that plans may be laid out today, the fact that the market knows or is confident that Trump's going to follow through on these promises is what's going to boost stocks.
Yeah, Dan, I mean, that, and you couple it with, the idea of him talking to the airline CEOs as well. We see a boost in the market. What's your take?
I think that the important thing to look at is that the market doesn't drive the economy drives the market. And if you want long-run increased sustained growth, you have to begin to reduce the burden of government, and lowering tax rates for individuals and businesses would be a great start, because Republicans have a bit of a circular firing squad going on now with the so-called border adjustable tax. Trump needs to break through that and get the GOP all speaking off the same hymn sheet and push through some good pro-growth tax reform.
Wow, you're singing my tune. President Trump is talking about cutting taxes, while some establishment Republicans are actually talking about creating new taxes, including one that was actually too much even for Nancy Pelosi, a carbon tax. Dan, how did this dog ever rise from the dead?
There have always been some Republicans who, for good reasons, they look at all the command and control regulation on this climate change issue, and they say this is very costly, very inefficient. What if we have some deal where we lower some tax over here, put in a carbon tax over here, get rid of all the regulations? On paper, it's not unreasonable, but in the real world of Washington, the moment you say to politicians, we're going to give you a new tax, then you wind up losing fiscal discipline. So I think it was a big mistake.
They always say, oh, we'll get rid of some other ones, but they never do. Scott, the fact is Nancy Pelosi, one of the most liberal members of the House, she dismissed the carbon tax when she had a Democratic House, a Democratic Senate. They could have passed it, but even then it was too much for her. Why are Republicans talking about it now?
Yeah, that should tell you, David, that it was especially a bad idea. You know, the funny thing that's going on now, David, if you hear about the rhetoric that's coming out of the Beltway, is that, well, we can't do tax reform, or we can't cut taxes without paying for these tax cuts. And you know as well as I do, man, in the last 8, 12, even 16 years, none of these tax cuts have really ever been paid for. Remember PAYGO? Remember a lot of these tax cuts that Obama promised weren't paid for, mortgage deduction, all that stuff. So going forward, I mean, if you see these tax cuts, it's like Dan said about growing the economy, which will bring in more revenues versus having to pay for them.
All right, President Trump is trying his very best, but even he can't help Twitter stock from diving as the social media company digs for profits, despite it now requiring the constant attention of the entire world. Scott, how is this possible?
Well, it shouldn't be possible, Melissa. I mean, seeing the Twitter earnings report made me crazy like Charles Oakley at Madison Square Garden. I tell you, because if you look at how Twitter has behaved in the last 1, 2 years and how they have barely grown their active users, how the ad revenues keep dropping, if they can't make money in this environment, that is not a reason to own their stock.
Yeah, Dan, I mean, it is just astonishing. Here you have the President of the United States with a huge following. You've got to be on Twitter to see what he's doing, see what he's talking about. So many people use it, yet at the same time, they can't turn it into anything worthwhile. What happens to this company?
Beats me, but I know one thing for sure. Donald Trump should secretly short the stock and then announce he's going off Twitter, because he probably drives a big chunk of their traffic.
Yeah, not a bad plan. Scott Martin, honestly, I mean, what could this company do going forward?
You know, Dan mentioned it. I mean, if you look at their Q4 numbers when Trump was actually active on there, their numbers were not impressive. I'll tell you what's else interesting that's really, I think, a cautionary tale. Look at a lot of the turnover on the executive level and some of the internal employees, as far as the high-valued employees that they have. There's a lot of turnover. There's been a lot of people leaving. Leadership at the top is failing the company.
All right, guys. Thank you.